Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm very glad. Good afternoon, everyone. So today I'm very glad to present a topic about visual language learning for visual recognition in this tutorial session. So in this presentation, I will walk you through the visual language learning for visual recognition. Okay, so before that, the first question we need to ask is, what is visual recognition? So as you can see from this figure, so the visual recognition actually consists of two parts. The first part is to take visual signal as input. For example, there is a bird, and then our brain is trying to process this signal and then finally extract it a semantic information. So as a definition, in the Dr. John Hammer, so visual object recognition serves as a gateway from vision to cognitive process such as categorization, language, and even reasoning. And that's why I think this topic is very related to the visual language in general. So to summarize, the visual recognition actually is trying to observe the visual object and map it with semantic concept. So please note that the semantic concept here is very important in the visual recognition. So as you can see here, so in general way, the visual recognition actually consists of two parts, the vision and the language. So then the next question we want to ask is how model learns visual recognition? The most commonly used way is supervised learning. The goal of the supervised learning is trying to map an image to a discrete label. Of course, this discrete label also associated with some visual concept. For example, give an image of an apple, and then we want to map this apple to, for example, a label 2. And this label 2 is associated with an apple concept. And this concept actually is a semantic. So as we all know, the supervised learning has been developed for a long time. So from the original, a very classic data set like MNIST and to Self-Attain to ImageNet to the most recently more even larger data set. And along with the data set, actually, we have been developing a lot of different techniques to cope with this kind of supervised learning problem. Especially after the deep learning era, we have seen a lot of convolutional network and transformer network and RNN network to propose to learn this kind of supervised learning object functions. So for example, we have RaceNet, we have Swing Transformer, and we have AlexNet at the beginning of the deep learning era. However, the supervised learning actually has some pros and cons. The pros of the supervised learning is that so it has densely labeled samples for each category. For example, we have apple, and probably we take photos of apple from different angle and different kind of shape, etc. But there are also some drawbacks of supervised learning because it usually requires a lot of human effort. We cannot ask humans to enter the world of the labels in the visual world, right? And also because of this kind of costly label effort, so we cannot have enough number of categories or semantic categories to cover all of the observations in our realistic world. So to tackle this, actually, we have some other kind of method called zero-shot learning. So it's kind of canonical zero-shot learning. So this kind of learning method is trying to map an image up to description of a visual concept. For example, given apple, so we want to map this apple image to a description of this concept. It's a fruit, it's a red, it's a sphere. And next time, if we are giving an orange, then the output should be a fruit and with yellow color. And finally, we map these attributes to different individual concept, apple, orange. This is so-called canonical zero-shot learning. And to tackle this problem, actually, we also collect a lot of data sets like the fine-grained birds categorization and AWA2 and the APY. So all of these methods actually providing the images and also the descriptions associated with each of the concept. And the goal is to learn the mapping between the image and the description of each concept. And we have seen a lot of works to have been developed to tackle this problem. So there are also some pros and cons. The pros of this zero-shot canonical way is that it directly learns the visual semantic matching, which means that so it's just learn the matching between the image and the description of each individual concept actually is not that flexible or free-form way. And also, actually, there are some kind of small scale with limited vocabulary. Actually, this also share with supervised learning kind of method. And finally, this method usually use a fixed visual and a text encoder. So basically, they are just trying to learn a projection function to project the pre-extracted visual and the text feature and align them together. So follow up this kind of work, we also have a generical way to do the visual semantic space learning. So this visual semantic space learning actually has been studied for a long time. So it's trying to align the image and the text. Still use this as an example. So for example, we have an apple. We have some description like a red apple and a orange and one yellow orange. So the method is trying to map these visual signals and to the text descriptions of each of the image and vice versa. We know a lot of works. Some of famous work like device and like the deep structure preserving image text embedding learning, etc. All of these works actually share some similar concept or similar goal, which is that mapping the image and the text to some feature space and do the alignment. And note that the difference between this visual semantic learning and the zero-shot learning is that in this case, the text actually is not necessary to be the attribute or some other kind of descriptions of the individual concept. It's more like a free-form kind of text. For example, Coco image, we want to map the Coco image to the text. And then we can see that, so this is basically we have some pros and the cons. So the pros is that, so we have the ability to learn a model to directly do the visual semantic matching. And similar to the zero-shot learning, actually it still have the fixed visual and the text encoder. And finally, it cannot directly be used to do the visual recognition, which means that it cannot be directly used to recognize the image to some visual concept. So finally, it comes to the contrastive visual language learning. So the goal actually is very similar, but in this case, actually the model is trying to use this kind of contrastive learning to map the visual signal to any format of the text. It can be a free-form text. It can be a concept with some prompt template. And the most important thing of this kind of contrastive visual language learning is that it's end-to-end learning on large-scale cohorts. I think everyone here already know the clip. Actually, this belongs to this category. So the most recent art along this kind of contrastive visual language learning actually is very crowded. As you can see here from the beginning of the clip model, we have seen a lot of different kind of contrast visual language learning for different level of vision tasks. It can be image recognition task, it can be object detection task, it can be semantic segmentation task, etc. And in this tutorial, I will mainly talk about how we can leverage this visual language learning for image level recognition. And I will briefly cover how we can leverage this visual language learning for visual region level recognition. I will first talk about the first part. So let's first recap what the contrastive language image learning proposed by OpenAI is. So as you can see here, it basically takes a large amount of image text pairs. It can be up to 400 million kind of image text pairs crawled from the internet. And then it maps the image and the text to some embedding with some random initialized text visual and text encoder, and finally learn some element. So once it's pre-trained, then this model can be applied to do the image classification task with some kind of prompt. So which means that it fills the concept to some text prompt and then make the final prompt looks like a text. So finally, this kind of model can be scaled up by using very, very simple object function. So as you can see, this is basically a very simple contrast learning, the bidirectional contrast learning between the image and the text. So the observation is that this contrast learning actually is very effective. And compared with the generative learning object, which is trying to generate some sentence given image. Actually, it can learn much faster given the same amount of data. And of course, you can see here, the data really matter. So if we use maybe several millions of data, actually the performance on the zero-shot performance on the zero-shot task actually is not that good. But if we scale up to 400 million, you can see here the performance actually gradually increased to some good level. And finally, if the model is further scaled up, then you can see here on the right side, the zero-shot performance can be on par with the ResNet model per channel on ImageNet 1K. So the lesson from the CLIP model is that the image recognition can be formulated as image text matching problem instead of image label matching problem. I think this is a very good point and a good inspiration from the CLIP model. And the second point is that image recognition does not require human annotated image label data, but huge amount of noisy image text pairs. Actually, this opens up a new way to learn to do the visual recognition. And the third point is that contrast learning is a good learning objective. It's simple, effective, and it can leverage a large amount of multimodal learning data. And finally, the two-tone model without any fusion actually is sufficient probably to learn a good and generic visual and text encoder. So let's draw some figure for this contrast learning. So basically, given the image and text as input, we have two separate encoder. One is image encoder, one is text encoder. We leverage the contrast learning to compute the loss and then backprop the loss to the individual encoders. So the most recent art is trying to tackle this problem to further improve the performance. For example, by data scaling up, by even innovative model design, and object functions. So I will cover these three pieces one by one. So the first is data scaling up. So as we know, the CLIP model actually already uses a lot of data. It has 400 million data, but Google further scale up to 1.8 billion image text pairs, which is proposed in Elan. And based on this even noisy web data, the model actually can learn even better representations to achieve even better zero-shot image recognition. Of course, after fine-tuning, the model is also better than the CLIP pre-trained model. So on the other hand, so we have also seen a lot of different innovative model design. So I will list a few of them. So the first part is that, so the contrast language image pre-training proposed in CLIP actually is a global image text matching. So what if we convert the coarse-grained matching to a fine-grained matching? The intuition is very simple. So it just computed the loss by first computed the token-wise similarity, each of the visual token and each of the text token, and then just aggregate the matrix by maxing or by min pooling, etc. And finally, the affinity matrix is same as used in CLIP. But surprisingly, this kind of simple method actually can improve the performance significantly. As you can see here, given the same kind of capacity and the model per train with Flip actually get a better zero-shot performance. It can be up to 3 points on average. As you can see from the left side, this kind of fine-grained contrast learning actually can help the model to localize each individual object in the image. So another model design is proposed by Google. The method is called LEAD. So what if we do not pre-train all of them from scratch? What if we just fix the pre-trained image encoder and then just tune the text encoder to map to match the image representations? Indeed, this works. So I think this works is because of 2 reasons. The first reason is that the pre-trained image encoder actually has already learned a lot from the image dataset. And then this kind of image representations can be further tuned based on this contrastive language image pre-training. As you can see here, compared with the CLIP, so this model actually significantly outperformed the original CLIP model based on this kind of strategy. So besides that, this contrastive learning actually is also affected by what kind of learning object function we are using. So as we just mentioned, the contrast learning actually is very effective, but whether we can combine this contrastive learning with other learning object function, for example, self-supervised learning or supervised learning. So let's first talk about the combination of it with the self-supervised learning. One of the work is called declip. So this kind of method actually integrates 3 different object functions. The first is self-supervised learning on each modality. And it just takes some off-the-shelf method like SimSam, like master language modeling to pre-train this image and text encoder individually. And they also propose a multi-view supervision to do more stronger data augmentation. And finally, they use some nearest neighbor supervision. So by finding the nearest text embedding as a matched text to image, because we usually, it's assumed that this image text actually is not exactly one-to-one matching. Probably it can match to multiple text in the training set. And the performance, of course, is much better in terms of the data efficiency. Given 7.1 fewer data, the performance can match the original click model. And similarly, there are another work called sleep. So this model is very simple in terms of it's just combining these 2 types of training method and finally also achieve much better performance than the original click model. So on the other hand, what if we combine the contrastive rich language learning with supervised learning? So in this case, actually, we would like to introduce a new perspective. The supervised learning actually uses the categorical labels, but with the concept associated. This concept has been never used in the training stage. And on the other hand, the language image learning actually assumes each image text pair belongs to a unique label. And this uniqueness actually is implicit in the training set. So the interesting point is that whether we can project these 2 types of data into the same image text label space, so the supervised learning actually is a blue point, and the language image pre-training is a green point. And finally, if we can unify them together, we will see the yellow star. This kind of yellow star is kind of language image and label learning. So this kind of learning can be potentially achieved the best of both worlds: discriminative visual representation from the supervised data and the broad semantic coverage from the image text pairs. So this learning objective is pretty simple. Just combine the supervised label data and the image text pairs together and finally build a larger FD matrix. And on top of that, we still compute some kind of contrast loss. But the difference is that this contrast loss is never guided by a one-to-one mapping. It's probably a one-to-multiple mapping. And based on this learning objective, we can see that it can absorb the image text pairs given the original image label data and train the model seamlessly. You can see here it can improve the performance universally, particularly the zero-shot performance. And then this image label data can also, on the other way around, benefit the image text pair on low-shot recognition. So basically, if we add the image label data, for example, ImageNet data, to the original image text pair, it can also universally improve the performance across different benchmarks. So finally, this kind of model can be further scaled up as shown in the Florence model. And this Florence model actually can achieve much better ImageNet zero-shot performance compared with the clip, compared with flip, etc. And this will be also covered by the CVPR keynote. So finally, the learning objective can be further extended to the combination of the contrastive visual language learning plus the generative learning. So recently, we know that there is a method called COCA. So this method actually is trying to combine the learning objective of the contrast learning and the generative learning. So it trains the image encoder, unimodal text encoder, and the multimodal text decoder simultaneously. And it also trains both on the image text pairs and the image level data. So based on this, actually the pipeline is pretty simple and straightforward. And after the training, it can be applied to the image recognition. It can be applied to the image text retrieval. It can be further applied to the image captioning. So finally, it further improves the performance and achieve a lot of different SOTA numbers on different metrics. So the last question we would like to ask is why contrastive visual language learning works well. So we would like to look into the data. So what kind of data the model is learning from, because we are using the image text files. So as you can see here from this table, we list the number of concepts and the density of each concept for different data sets. It's include the image classification data and also the image text file data. So if we, from the top to bottom, we can see the number of concepts actually is dramatically enlarged from maybe hundreds, thousands to millions of. And on the other hand, actually the density of this concept actually is becoming sparser and sparser. So that's why we can observe that actually these two type of data can be complementary to each other in terms of their concept coverage and the density. So finally, we also did another analysis between the pre-training data and the downstream data, because we always evaluate on some downstream data. And then we computed the concept coverage between the pre-trained data along with image text files, and then on each of the downstream data set. As you can see here in the table, actually a large number of the entries are non-zero or even much higher, which means that actually the image text files covers a lot of concept in the downstream classification, zero-shot classification data set. So this means that pre-training corpus on this from the image text files already cover a lot of concept. And further, this means that zero-shot is probably not a real zero-shot. But on the other hand, this kind of zero-shot probably is a realistic way to learn for the model. So finally, we did a visualization based on the learned representation. On the left side, if we only use the contrastive learning on the ImageNet 1K data. So you can see here, if we project the concept from the ImageNet 21K to the same feature space, you can see here it does not make sense, right? So the closest concept to tench is a flower. The closest concept to a cardon, a flower, is a status or something like that. And on the right hand, if we add the image text file data to the model, then the feature space, the semantic understanding of the space is making much more sense. Given the flower, the closest concept from the ImageNet 21K is was a flower. Given fish, it was a fish. So this means that the image text file data can indeed help the model to learn a generic understanding of a rich amount of semantic concept. This is can be never done by learning from totally just pure the image level data, like the ImageNet 1K or ImageNet 21K. So the takeaway message for this is that visual recognition is essentially a vision language problem, because the goal is to align the images with semantic concepts or descriptions. And again, the larger scale image text files can help the model to learn the understanding of the rich semantics, as we shown before. And finally, the contrastive visual language learning can be combined with other learning methods, such as self-choice learning, supervised learning, and even generative learning. So I will finally quickly cover this part. If we know, okay, the model can understand the global image, then what if we ask the model to understand the region? So the basic way of this kind of visual region understanding is that, okay, we extract the region from each of the image. And has already been done by RCN or fast RCN. Extract the bounding box of the feature and map to some concept. And then the question is that, can we localize the regions and then recognize them with a vision language model? Because the vision language model supports a lot of concept. This is very important, right? So based on this motivation, there are a lot of works like the open vocabulary, RCN, and the VLP, and recently the region clip. So one of this model is trying to first extract the regions from the image and then map these regions to different concepts. Maybe the concept actually is never exactly same during the training time, but it still can recognize it. So finally, to conclude this talk, so we would like to mention that the vision language learning can help the vision significantly, including the image level and the region level visual recognition. And also, the vision language learning leverage image text files, but can go beyond by integrate the supervised learning data, self-choice learning data, and generative learning paradigm. And vision language learning can serve as a generic learning paradigm for zero-shot, few-shot, and transfer learning. this can be never done by, for example, the canonical supervised learning or supervised learning. However, there are still some challenges behind this kind of pipeline. So how to learn from the large scale image test pairs more efficiently? Because most of the people cannot afford such a large amount of computing resource to train the model on 400 million data. And this is still open question. Fortunately, there are some previous work like the DClip is trying to cope with this. And also how to learn more discriminative visual representations for downstream tasks. So as we know, as we shown before, this concept density from the image test pair are usually very sparse, which means that the model cannot learn to distinguish or group different concepts. This is why we observe this kind of visual representation learned from the contrastive learning cannot work very well for discriminatory tasks, for example, object detection, fine-tuning, or segmentation, fine-tuning, etc. And finally, how to enable the fine-grained understanding of the visual concept. I think this is very important, and which will be further covered by Peng Chuan in the next talk. So thanks for the attention. Yeah.